I gotta say, man, I will always give 10 points to weird, quirky exotics. And Ruinous Effigy is definitely one of the weirdest, quirkiest exotic we have ever seen. First up, this is a trace rifle. Its quest just dropped today. Down below in the description will be a quest guide from myself. Whenever that's uploaded, my editor's working on it. We're actually trying to make some quest guides. So yeah, feel free to check it out. But in this video, we're gonna be reviewing Ruinous Effigy, not only in its base exotic form, but in its final form. As we also landed the exotic catalyst to this, which amplifies this weapon pretty substantially. So first up, this weapon comes with the exotic perk Transmutation. Final blows with this weapon collapses the victim into a void transmutation sphere. You can kind of see it's like it collapses on itself. It drops that void orb, which can actually be picked up. Due to the trait evolution, these transmutation spheres that you created can be picked up and wielded as weapons by you or your allies. You can use light attacks, heavy attacks, and it also has a guard drain function that does some pretty nice AoE damage. Now, the exotic catalyst found in this weapon actually allows the weapon to deal increased damage against targets that have been damaged by transmutation spheres. Meaning if I pick up the orb and I do any of these attacks, a light attack, a heavy attack, or even just that AoE guard attack, it will buff the damage of my Ruinous Effigy. Now, it only buffs the damage of Ruinous. It does not buff the damage of any of your other weapons, but it's pretty substantial. Matter of fact, we're looking at a 30% increase there in damage just with this exotic catalyst. Now, that may not sound that impressive, but where Ruinous really starts to shine is that it's able to stack its damage with both a buff and a debuff, meaning that its increase in damage is directly tied to the exotic and not necessarily to the system that we have in place. Again, since Shadowkeep, Bungie has made it to where things cannot stack multiplicatively, and on top of that, you can only get one buff and one debuff on a target at a time. Now, the game registers what the greater buff is. For instance, if I pop a Weapons of Light or stand in a rift, I'm going to get the Weapons of Light buff over the Well of Radiance buff, and the same applies to debuffs. But Ruinous here is able to apply a 30% buff to itself while simultaneously taking advantage of things like Oppressive Darkness, Tethers, Weapons of Light, Well of Radiance. It's because that its buff to itself is completely separated from the system that we currently have in place, the one buff debuff combo. This is what gives Ruinous an edge over many other weapons, most notably over other trace rifles. Now, Divinity also had a similar effect, but it got nerfed. It used to do the exact same thing, where it would actually apply the buff separate from the one buff debuff combo, thus allowing things to multiplicatively stack, which made us wonder, will Ruinous also be nerfed in the future, similar to what happened to Divinity? Not necessarily. Again, this buff only affects Ruinous. The fact that these things stack multiplicatively would probably be an issue had it increased all weapon damage. But the fact that it only increases Ruinous, this seems like an intentional sandbox design on Bungie's end to give more value to this trace rifle to actually use it as a great DPS option. Now, first and foremost, we need to discuss these different levels of attacks. These light attacks, these heavy attacks, as well as the block feature. Notice that the light attack pretty much looks like a melee. You've seen the same process with many other things. The question that arose was, could this proc melee-based exotics? Things like Wormgod Caress, Winter's Guile. Those exotics actually increase the melee damage with each melee hit or each melee kill. Would these things stack or even proc with one of these transmutation spheres? Unfortunately, no. Matter of fact, we tried this with a number of different exotics. I tried it with Karnstein, Winter's Guile, Wormgod, Doomfang. None of them seemed to proc. It's very apparent here that Bungie designed this weapon as well as its spheres to be completely separate as to avoid any unintentional stacking. Now, something that does proc though, which seemed to get the most benefit from these spheres, is Nezarec Sin. I rocked this exotic all day today with Abyssal Extractors, and whether I was doing light attacks, heavy attacks, or just dealing AoE damage with its block function, Nezarec Sin and Abyssal Extractors was always procking. Such a fantastic exotic here to proc with this, guys, as the transmutation spheres are void based, and so is the trace rifle. So not only do you proc this exotic perk while getting trace rifle kills, but also the spheres themselves, which substantially throws up the damage, also counts as a void based kill. Now, considering that it is a void based kill, could it actually proc something like void detonators on Middle Tree Sentinel, most notably with its block function? At least to my knowledge and what we tested, no, it does not, which is very unfortunate. Again, like I said, it seems that Bungie has done their due diligence here to make sure that this exotic doesn't unintentionally stack with certain subclass elements or melee-based exotics. I would be very surprised if a bug, though, is not discovered from now until tomorrow. But who knows? We'll see. With that being said, you've probably noticed that this trace rifle is a little different than some of our other trace rifles. Number one, it's an 8 impact archetype trace. Things like Wave Splitter, Prometheus Lens, Cold Heart. These are 6 impacts. Even Divinity is also a 6 impact trace. Now all those trace rifles sit at 1,000 rounds per minute, as well as Ruinous here. So Ruinous, at least stat-wise, should be hitting harder, correct? It does slightly, but only in PvE. Stacked up against something like Wave Splitter, it does barely 6% more damage in comparison. And again, we're not even taking into account things like exotic perks. Obviously, things like Divinity does substantially more damage, despite it being a 6 impact trace rifle, but it makes up for it with its exotic perks. Same with things like Cold Heart, and even Prometheus Lens and its AoE effect. The main thing to take note of is just from a damage to damage perspective, that 8 impact is definitely reflected inside of PvE with that 6% increase in damage. This is where things got a little confusing for me though, because inside of PvP, we do not see that increase in damage over something like Wave Splitter. Matter of fact, Ruinous Effigy here does the same amount of damage as other 6 impact trace rifles inside of Crucible, despite it being an 8 impact trace, thus giving it a time to kill value of roughly 0.6 seconds. A lot of 6s here, which sounds good, right? I know a lot of people are like, whoa, 0.6, that's pretty good, right? The downside to this trace rifle, and we're not talking about the spheres right now, we're just talking about the trace rifle itself. Because again, as nasty as these spheres may be inside of PvP and inside of PvE, if you can't get a kill with this trace rifle, it doesn't really matter. When comparing Ruinous though to other trace rifles, Ruinous starts to experience damage fall off at about 24 meters. In comparison to Prometheus Lens, Cold Heart, as well as Wave Splitter, those trace rifles don't experience damage fall off until 35 meters. On top of that, it does the same damage as those weapons despite being slightly higher impact. Now again, just want to reiterate, the same damage that it does is only shown in PvP. It does more damage inside of PvE with that 6% increase. That's just not being reflected inside of PvP, which makes me wonder if Bungie either did that intentionally, maybe it's bugged, maybe they're going to come out and say, whoa, this was actually supposed to be a 6 impact trace rifle. Who knows? As of right now though, it does sit at a 0.6 second time to kill with some very steep damage fall off, thus kind of putting this trace rifle in a sticky situation. I found myself losing duels against other 600 round per minute auto rifles, and even though 0.6 is better than 0.7, most of those other auto rifles just hit harder, meaning they have to land less bullets, and on top of that, they have substantially more range. But when you get a kill, when you actually get the kills, this beautiful orb drops beneath you, and let me tell you fellas, it's fun as hell to use. I was rocking blink with mine, would blink into enemies, maybe even past enemies or above them, and then proceed to slam. Rift style, baby. Y'all know what this is? This is essentially the Rift animation. It's almost as if Bungie's trying to tell us that Rift's coming back. I had a lot of fun with this. Now, the melee damage, or the light attack damage, was not enough to one-shot kill. It does 150 damage, which is pretty substantial, and the animation, I would say, is pretty quick. Like, you can do a 1-2-1-2 pretty fast. Now, granted, you're in close quarter territory. I mean, as close as you can get. Your face is pretty much in your enemy's nuts. And if he's like most of my enemies, next to his nuts is a Fellwinter's Lie. So it's somewhat difficult to be this uncomfortably close with this bare bone orb, which is why I happen to just smash when I get around my enemies. I don't even go for the light attacks. 9 times out of 10, you might die, at least against a proficient shotgun user, whatever the hell those are, which is why I was doing this blink action stuff, slamming, 3-peeking, which you're automatically doing because you're holding an orb, but whatever. Now, the overhead slam does some pretty nice damage. It can get multi-kills for you, which is quite nice, although they do have to be somewhat close. Again, everything here is all about being uncomfortably close, but it does 300 damage with that slam attack. It is not enough damage, though, to kill a super, although very close to killing them. Pretty much if that super is 3/4 health or less, you're going to be able to take them down. As a matter of fact, if you happen to do a melee, whether before or after your heavy attack, doesn't really matter, you can get the kill if they don't kill you first. Again, all these ranges are uncomfortable ranges to be in with this little bitty purple orb. Now, the AoE effect was something I was really banking on being just absolutely nasty. I was like, this is it right here. I'm going to stand on a control point and just block. It does not do much damage. It does about 10 damage per tick, which some people goes, well, that's pretty good. It's not bad, but it's not great. It does, however, give you some levels of damage resistance. We were running numbers earlier, and unless less is lying to me, approximately 50% resistance is given to you. And you probably noticed that I died. What happens when you hold this AoE effect long enough, when you reach the point where there's no longer any more charge in the sphere, it begins to drain your life. It's kind of poetic. I guess that's how it's able to continue its dark darkness sphere thingy by taking your light or your life, whatever. There are ways to work around this. We tried a bubble, a well of radiance in a bubble. Yes, you can block for a pretty long time, but just know at some point you will die. You may last like an extra 10 seconds longer, but at the cost of your life. So don't mash on that block feature for far too long or it will kill you. Now I actually was rocking it with Devour and I thought I figured it out. I was like, hell yes. I'm gonna be rocking it with Devour. I'm gonna be constantly killing these Shadow Thrall. I'll never die. No, the game has a cutoff point. There is a cutoff point where it says, nope, you've blocked for way too long, die fool. That's pretty much what happens. Either way it goes, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the block feature for Crucible unless you're like about to die and maybe you just happen to pick up this sphere and you're trying to get a cap point. I don't know. Then maybe I would be like, okay, that's the way to go. But to me, I would use the spheres more offensively if you plan on using Ruinous inside of Crucible. Now, is this trace rifle the one? I mean, I've talked it up pretty good bit. We've got some pretty good exotic trace rifles, but they are nowhere near top dogs amongst our best DPS weapons out there. You know, at one time, they were though. I will say this, Cold Heart at one time was the go-to weapon for damage phase against Callus. Kind of crazy how long it's been. Wave Splitter used to absolutely wreck everyone inside of Crucible. Prometheus Lens was so bad that the infamous laser tag weekend is still very much alive in our memories today. They even got an emblem to showcase the survivors that made it through that weekend of trials. At one time, the only way you can get through a Master Nightfall was with Divinity. So needless to say, even though we're not using trace rifles at every twist and turn, many of them have had an effect on us greatly. I'm here to say, guys, Ruinous Effigy is the best trace rifle in the game. It's gonna blow your mind how good this thing is. And it's gonna blow your mind even more in team engagements with other people using Ruinous Effigy. You see, this exotic really opened itself up to me when you obtain the exotic catalyst. Because not only does it buff the damage of Ruinous for yourself, but it also buffs the damage of Ruinous for your teammates. Their damage is also increased. On top of that, the increase there in damage lasts for so long. It's lasting this entire duration that I'm sitting here gunning down Greg 2.0. So the fact that it lasts this long and it stacks with both debuffs and buffs together. Oh, and it increases the damage for not just myself, but also my teammates. Fellas, this trace rifle is most definitely nasty. So guys, get your hands on it. I was very much impressed with it. It's got a weird play style that, no lie, may not be applicable to every single encounter. But I love the ability to play aggressively with this trace rifle, to be rewarded for playing aggressively. The uniqueness of these spheres and the multiple attacks that you can utilize with it. And the fact that it's not just good in doing damage and ag control, but simultaneously fantastic when doing single target damage all on its own. This is hands down a trace rifle worth going after. It's got some pretty poor reviews right now, and I don't really know why. Not sure what people expected from it. I'm impressed with it though, at least inside of PvE. For PvP, it's most definitely a meme weapon for the most part. So let me know in the comments below what you think about this one. Are you liking it? Again, A+ to Bungie on this one. I'm always down for unique weapons. I was concerned that the exotic catalyst was just gonna be some stat buff, but I was pleasantly surprised about it. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.